In American politics, few rivalries have stirred as much attention and debate as the one brewing between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. These two figures, representing starkly different visions for America's future, have captured the nation's attention in ways that few other politicians could. Donald Trump, the real estate mogul turned 45th president of the United States, and Kamala Harris, the first woman of color to serve as vice president, are two political heavyweights on a collision course. But who are they really? What do they represent? And what could this showdown mean for the future of American politics? Let's dive deep into the world of Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. Before Donald Trump entered politics, he was already a household name. Born in Queens, New York in 1946, Trump was known primarily as a real estate developer and reality TV star. His business ventures, such as the construction of Trump Tower in Manhattan, along with his ownership of various casinos and hotels, gave him a platform that extended well beyond the world of real estate. But while Trump's business acumen is often lauded, his foray into politics in 2015 shook the country to its core. When Trump announced his candidacy for the presidency, few political analysts believed he could win. He had no political experience, no policy track record, and his campaign speeches were filled with inflammatory rhetoric. But Trump knew how to tap into the frustrations of a large section of the American populace, a group that felt left behind by globalization and disillusioned by establishment politics. With his message of America First, Trump appealed to voters who were angry about trade deals, immigration, and a political system they viewed as corrupt and unresponsive. By the time Trump won the Republican nomination in 2016, it was clear that he was no ordinary candidate. He defied conventional political norms at every turn, and in November 2016, in one of the most shocking upsets in U.S. electoral history, he defeated former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to become president. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, comes from a very different background. Born in Oakland, California in 1964, Harris was raised in a family that valued education and social justice. Her mother was a cancer researcher from India, and her father an economist from Jamaica. Harris's upbringing was steeped in activism, particularly during the civil rights movement, which would later influence her approach to politics. Harris earned her law degree from the University of California, Hastings, and soon began a career as a prosecutor, becoming the district attorney of San Francisco in 2004. Her tough-on-crime policies, however, were controversial, as critics argued that she disproportionately targeted minority communities. Yet, she continued her political rise, being elected as California's Attorney General in 2010 and later to the U.S. Senate in 2016. Harris's career has been marked by a focus on issues like criminal justice reform, healthcare, and immigration. As a senator, she gained national attention for her sharp questioning during congressional hearings, especially during the confirmation hearings for Supreme Court Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. But it wasn't just her courtroom-style grilling that got people talking. It was her ability to balance progressive ideals with pragmatism. When Joe Biden selected her as his running mate in the 2020 election, Harris made history as the first Black woman and first person of South Asian descent on a major party's presidential ticket. Her election as vice president in 2020 was a landmark moment for the United States, one that reflected the country's evolving demographics and growing emphasis on diversity and inclusion in leadership. At the heart of the Trump-Harris rivalry is a fundamental clash of ideologies. Trump's brand of populism, built on economic nationalism, isolationism, and a drain-the-swamp mentality, runs counter to Harris's progressive platform, which emphasizes social justice, climate change, and healthcare for all. Trump's America is one that puts economic interests above all else. He withdrew from international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord and pursued tariffs and trade wars to protect American manufacturing jobs. His tax cuts, particularly for corporations and the wealthy, were designed to stimulate economic growth, but they also deepened the nation's debt and widened income inequality. Harris, by contrast, has advocated for expanding access to healthcare, increasing taxes on the wealthy, and fighting climate change through the Green New Deal. Where Trump rolled back environmental protections, Harris has pushed for stronger regulations and green energy investments. Her progressive policies align with a broader movement within the Democratic Party to address systemic inequalities in American society, particularly those related to race, gender, and class. But the ideological differences go beyond policy. They are rooted in how each politician views the role of government in people's lives. Trump sees government intervention as a hindrance to individual and economic freedom. Harris, however, believes that government has a responsibility to level the playing field and provide safety nets for the most vulnerable. Both Trump and Harris have had defining moments in their careers that have shaped public perception and solidified their roles as leaders of their respective movements. For Trump, the moment that most crystallized his political persona was his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. His administration's response was widely criticized for downplaying the severity of the virus and for his repeated clashes with scientific experts. But Trump's defiance of public health protocols and his calls to reopen the economy resonated with many of his supporters, who felt that lockdowns were an overreach of government power. Harris, meanwhile, faced a critical moment during the 2020 presidential debates. Her powerful denunciation of Biden's past stance on school busing during a Democratic primary debate became a viral moment, showcasing her ability to challenge even her future running mate. While Harris later softened her criticisms of Biden, that moment solidified her reputation as a fierce advocate for racial justice and a formidable debater. The 2020 election itself was a pivotal point for both Trump and Harris. Trump's refusal to accept the election results and his baseless claims of voter fraud led to the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot, an event that will forever be linked to his presidency. For Harris, the election was a validation of her place in history as she was sworn in as the nation's first female vice president. A key aspect of the Trump-Harris rivalry is how they are portrayed in the media and how they use media platforms to communicate with their supporters. Trump has mastered the art of using social media, particularly Twitter, to bypass traditional media outlets and speak directly to his base. His tweets often stoked controversy, but they kept him in the public eye and allowed him to control the narrative around his presidency. Even after being banned from social media platforms, Trump continues to use rallies, interviews, and statements to remain a central figure in Republican politics. Harris, on the other hand, has taken a more conventional approach to media. As vice president, her public appearances are often tightly controlled, and she tends to focus on policy issues rather than personal attacks. However, she has struggled to maintain the same level of media attention as Trump, who is a master at dominating the news cycle. Nevertheless, Harris's media presence has been significant in shaping her image as a symbol of progress and diversity in American leadership. Public perception of Trump and Harris couldn't be more different. Trump is loved by his base for his tell-it-like-it-is attitude, but he is despised by his critics for his inflammatory rhetoric and divisive policies. Harris is celebrated by many as a groundbreaking leader, but she faces criticism from both conservatives, who view her as too radical, and some progressives, who argue that she has not pushed hard enough for systemic change. As the 2024 presidential election approaches, the political landscape is rife with speculation about whether Trump and Harris will face off directly in a presidential race. Trump has hinted at a 2024 run, and his popularity within the Republican Party remains strong, despite his legal challenges and the controversies surrounding his presidency. Harris, while serving as vice president, is also considered a Democratic presidential candidate. However, she faces challenges within her own party, particularly from those who may prefer a more progressive candidate. The real question is, what would a Trump versus Harris face-off look like? It would undoubtedly be one of the most heated and divisive elections in U.S. history, with both candidates representing starkly different visions for the country. Trump's appeal to working-class voters and his hardline stance on immigration, trade, and foreign policy would clash with Harris's focus on social justice, climate change, and healthcare reform. The stakes couldn't be higher. A second Trump presidency would likely see a continuation of his nationalist and isolationist policies, while a Harris presidency could mark a significant shift toward a more progressive agenda focused on equity and inclusivity. The political rivalry between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris isn't just about two individuals vying for power. It's about competing visions of America's future. On one side, Donald Trump represents a return to traditional values, or at least what his supporters believe to be traditional values, with a focus on nationalism, economic protectionism, and a strong stance against illegal immigration. His base thrives on the idea of reclaiming a version of America that they feel is slipping away, where individualism, capitalism, and sovereignty are paramount. On the other hand, Kamala Harris embodies a vision of a more inclusive, diverse, and progressive America. Her platform focuses on addressing systemic inequalities, tackling the climate crisis head-on, and expanding access to healthcare, education, and economic opportunities for marginalized communities. Her supporters see her as a symbol of progress, the face of a changing nation that is more reflective of the people it serves. But as America becomes increasingly polarized, the rivalry between Trump and Harris isn't just political, it's cultural. The deep divisions in the country, based on race, class, geography, and ideology, are embodied in these two figures. Trump's America is rural, white, and blue-collar. Harris's America is urban, multicultural, and increasingly young. Both camps believe they are fighting for the soul of the country, and neither seems willing to compromise. It's impossible to fully understand the dynamic between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris without acknowledging the role that race and gender play in this rivalry. Trump's presidency was marked by racial tensions, with his hardline stance on immigration, his response to the Black Lives Matter protests, and his controversial comments on race relations in America. To his critics, Trump is seen as a president who exacerbated racial divides and appealed to white nationalist sentiments. Kamala Harris, as a Black and South Asian woman, represents the very diversity that Trump's base often feels threatened by. Her rise to the second highest office in the land was celebrated as a historic moment for women and people of color. But Harris's identity has also made her a target for racist and sexist attacks from her detractors, who question her qualifications and accuse her of being too radical or not radical enough. In many ways, the Trump-Harris rivalry reflects broader societal debates about race, gender, and representation in America. Trump's rhetoric often plays into fears of demographic change, while Harris's political career has been shaped by her efforts to bridge racial and gender divides. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are already shaping their political legacies in profound ways. For Trump, his legacy is one of disruption. He broke every political rule on his way to the presidency and continued to defy expectations once in office. His 4 years in the White House saw the dismantling of key policies from previous administrations, a dramatic shift in U.S. foreign policy, and a reshaping of the Republican Party into a populist movement centered around his personality. While his critics argue that Trump damaged American democracy, his supporters see him as a champion who stood up to the political establishment and fought for the interests of ordinary Americans. Kamala Harris's legacy, on the other hand, is still being written. As the first woman and person of color to serve as vice president, she has already secured a place in the history books. But the true measure of her legacy will depend on what she accomplishes in office. If Harris can successfully navigate the challenges of being a vice president and help push through significant policy reforms, she could be remembered as a transformative figure who helped reshape America in the face of deep divisions. But Harris also faces the unique challenge of being a trailblazer in an environment where women and people of color are often held to higher standards than their white male counterparts. As the first of her kind in such a high office, her every move is scrutinized, and the expectations placed on her are enormous. If she succeeds, Harris could open the door for future generations of women and people of color in leadership. If she falters, the political consequences could be far-reaching. While the Trump-Harris rivalry is primarily focused on domestic issues, the implications for the rest of the world are significant. As president, Trump took an America-first approach to foreign policy, pulling the U.S. out of international agreements, imposing tariffs on allies, and engaging in a contentious trade war with China. His approach to foreign relations was transactional, often prioritizing short-term economic gains over long-term alliances. Harris, by contrast, is more likely to pursue a multilateral approach to foreign policy, working with international organizations and allies to address global challenges like climate change, human rights, and international security. Her progressive stance on immigration and her support for refugees also stand in stark contrast to Trump's hardline policies on border security and immigration restrictions. The 2024 election, Trump versus Harris, would not only shape America's future, but also have ripple effects across the globe. For countries that rely on U.S. leadership in areas like NATO, climate policy, and trade, the outcome could determine the direction of global diplomacy for years to come. At its core, the rivalry between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is a clash between two distinct styles of leadership. Trump is the populist, relying on emotional appeals and a direct connection with his base. He thrives on conflict, often using it to rally his supporters and discredit his opponents. His style is combative, and his political strategy centers on division and loyalty. Harris, on the other hand, is a pragmatist. While she is aligned with progressive policies, her approach to governance is more measured and rooted in coalition building. She has made it clear that she believes in working within the system to enact change, rather than dismantling it outright. This pragmatic approach has earned her both praise and criticism from different corners of the political spectrum. But as America faces growing challenges, from economic inequality and racial injustice to climate change and global instability, the question remains, which approach will resonate more with voters? Will they choose the fiery populism of Donald Trump, or will they opt for the steady pragmatism of Kamala Harris?